The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the small Apache settlement, nestled between red rock formations. Ayana crouched beside the creek, scrubbing her worn dress against smooth stones. The water ran clear, but no amount of washing could cleanse the invisible stain her uncle claimed marked her soul. "Stay away from the cooking fires," Uncle Nalnish had commanded that morning, his weathered face twisted with familiar disgust. "Your presence spoils the food. The spirits whisper warnings about you." At 19, Ayana had grown accustomed to whispered conversations that ceased when she approached, women who stepped around her as if she carried disease, children who pointed from behind their mothers' skirts. The curse, they called it, a shadow that had supposedly followed her since winter fever claimed both her parents 3 years ago. She remembered that terrible season with painful clarity. Her father Bidzil, a respected hunter, had fallen first. Her mother Itzel tended him until the fever took her too. Ayana had nursed them both through endless nights, spooning water between cracked lips, placing cool cloths on burning foreheads. When death finally claimed them, she alone prepared their bodies according to tradition. She was with them when they died, Nalnish had declared to the tribal council. Death spirits cling to her. She brings misfortune wherever she goes. The accusation found fertile ground in minds already shaken by loss. That harsh winter had claimed several elders and 2 children. Fear made the community hungry for someone to blame, and Ayana, orphaned, alone, defenseless, became the perfect scapegoat. Now she lived on the settlement's edges in a small wickiup she'd built herself, surviving on scraps and occasional trapped rabbits. The isolation had taught her self-reliance, but carved deep wounds in her heart. As she wrung out her dress, Ayana noticed a rider approaching. Strangers were rare in this remote area. It was a white man, tall, lean, sitting his horse with easy confidence. His dusty clothes and weary posture spoke of long travel. The rider paused at the settlement's edge, uncertain of his welcome. Several Apache men approached with cautious but not hostile body language. From her position by the creek, Ayana couldn't hear their conversation, but saw the stranger gesture toward western mountains, likely asking directions. After brief exchange, the men pointed him toward a departing trail. But instead of leaving immediately, the stranger's gaze swept across the settlement and rested on Ayana. Even across the distance, she felt his attention, different from the fearful or disgusted looks she usually received. This was simple curiosity, perhaps concern. Their eyes met for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then an Apache man drew the stranger's attention back. He nodded, touched his hat in thanks, and urged his horse toward the western trail. Ayana remained by the creek long after he disappeared, something stirring in her chest she hadn't felt in years. For just a moment, someone had looked at her without fear or judgment, had simply seen her as a person. The afternoon passed in usual solitude. She tended her small garden, mended her blanket, prepared meager dinner of pine nuts and dried meat. As darkness fell, she settled outside her wickiup to watch stars emerge in the vast sky. Then she heard approaching hoofbeats. Her body tensed. Night visitors were never good news. But as the rider appeared in moonlight, she recognized the same stranger. He had returned, heading directly toward her dwelling. Ayana stood slowly, heart racing. No one visited her, especially strangers. She watched him dismount respectfully at distance and approach on foot, hands visible. "Ma'am," he called in English, voice carrying a slight drawl suggesting Texas or New Mexico origins. "I don't mean to disturb you, but I'm hoping you might help me." She studied him in moonlight. Perhaps early 30s, sun-weathered skin, lines around his eyes from years squinting against desert glare. His practical clothes, worn boots, canvas pants, cotton shirt, had seen better days. His bearing suggested strength tempered by loss, a quality she recognized in herself. "I speak English," she replied carefully, voice rusty from disuse. "Good," he said, relief evident. "My name is Thomas Brennan. I've got a ranch 15 miles west, up in the foothills. I'm looking for someone who knows this country well, someone willing to work for fair wages." Work? No one in her community would offer her honest employment. "What kind of work?" "I've got cattle scattered across rough territory," Thomas explained. "I need someone who can track, read sign, find water sources, someone who understands survival in this land." He paused, studying her moonlit face. "The men in your village said you spend time alone in wilderness. They said you know the country better than anyone." She almost laughed at the irony. The isolation that made her an outcast had given her valuable skills. They said this. Well, Thomas admitted with a slight smile, they suggested I was foolish for being interested, but I judge people for myself. For a long moment, they stood in silence, taking each other's measure. Finally, Ayana made a decision that would change both their lives. I will think about your offer. Come back tomorrow when the sun reaches its highest point. I will give you my answer then. Thomas nodded and touched his hat. I'll be here. Thank you for considering it, Miss Ayana. Miss Ayana, I hope to see you tomorrow. As he rode into darkness, Ayana remained standing outside her dwelling, mind racing with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. For the first time in 3 years, someone had offered her a chance at something more than mere survival. Dawn painted the Arizona sky in amber and rose as Ayana gathered her few possessions in her mother's leather pouch. She had decided, if Thomas Brennan returned with his offer, she would accept. Anything was better than this cursed existence. Word of the stranger's visit spread through the village like wildfire. From her distant dwelling, Ayana heard agitated conversations punctuated by her uncle's angry voice. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Nalnish appeared with 2 council members, his weathered face dark with rage. What foolishness is this about the White Rancher? He demanded. You would bring more curse upon our people by associating with outsiders? I would work for honest wages, Ayana replied, refusing to be intimidated. I would support myself instead of surviving on scraps. Scraps, Nalnish spat. We have been generous to allow you here at all, curse-bearer. Leave with this stranger and prove what I always knew. The death spirits have claimed your soul. Ashki, an older council member, stepped forward diplomatically. Ayana, among our people you have protection, even if circumstances are difficult. Out there you would be completely alone. White settlers care nothing for Apache women. Here I am already alone, Ayana responded, her voice gaining strength. At least among strangers I might prove my worth through actions, rather than suffer for superstitions I cannot control. Approaching hoofbeats interrupted their argument. Thomas Brennan rode into view, arriving precisely as promised. He dismounted and approached with calm confidence, though Ayana saw tension in his shoulders. Gentlemen, he said in English, nodding respectfully, I hope I'm not interrupting. Nalnish responded in rapid, hostile Apache. Thomas listened patiently, clearly understanding little. When her uncle finished, Thomas turned to Ayana with raised eyebrows. He says I am cursed, she translated simply. He believes my presence brings misfortune and death. He thinks you are foolish to offer me work. Thomas considered this thoughtfully rather than dismissively. Finally, he addressed Nalnish directly, while Ayana translated. I understand your concerns, but I judge people by their actions, not superstitions. This woman has survived alone for years in harsh country. That tells me she's resourceful, tough, and capable, qualities I need. Nalnish's face darkened further as Ayana translated. He launched into another angry tirade directed at Thomas. He says you don't understand the danger, Ayana explained. He says I will bring death to your cattle and misfortune to your ranch. He warns you to leave me here, where the curse can be contained. Thomas surprised everyone by responding in broken but understandable Apache. Clearly he knew more of the language than he'd initially revealed. I have seen much death and misfortune, he said slowly, pronunciation careful but respectful. I lost my wife and son to fever 3 years ago. My brother to raiders 2 years ago. If this woman is cursed, then so am I, and perhaps cursed people should stand together. The honest admission created profound silence. Ayana felt something shift in her chest. Understanding this stranger carried wounds as deep as her own. For the first time she comprehended why he'd looked at her without fear. He recognized a fellow survivor. Nalnish seemed taken aback by such directness and personal revelation. The rancher's admission of loss created a dynamic the Apache elder wasn't prepared to handle. You both carry death's shadow, Nalnish said finally, switching to English. Perhaps it is fitting you should face that shadow together, away from those who still live in light. Not a blessing, but not absolute prohibition either. Her uncle was washing his hands of responsibility. Thomas turned to her, eyes serious but kind. The offer stands, Ayana. I can promise fair wages, honest work, and warm, dry shelter. Ranch life is hard and demanding, but if you're willing to try, so am I. Ayana looked at the 3 village men, at the settlement where she'd lived as an unwanted outcast for 3 years. Then back at the stranger offering something better. The decision came surprisingly easily. "I will come with you." The next hour passed in a blur. Ayanna gathered her possessions while Thomas waited patiently. Her uncle and the council members departed without further words, their silence revealing relief at having the cursed woman removed. As they prepared to leave, Thomas brought his horse beside a mounting rock. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Ayanna replied. Though it had been years since she'd had access to horses, her family's animals had been distributed among relatives with no intention of sharing. Thomas helped her settle behind him, showing her where to hold on securely but appropriately. As they rode from the settlement, Ayanna felt complex emotions: grief for the life she was leaving, fear of the unknown future, and tentative hope this encounter might lead to something better than survival. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled west. Desert giving way to rolling hills with hardy grass and scattered oak and pine. The air grew cooler with elevation, and Ayanna breathed more easily than she had in months. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, needing his voice to quiet nervous flutters. "Not much to look at yet," Thomas admitted. 2,000 acres of good grazing with a year-round stream, 300 head of cattle scattered across the property, plus a dozen horses. The house is small but solid. I built it myself." He paused, tension evident in his shoulders. "I had help starting the ranch. My wife Sarah and boy Daniel. They died in the fever outbreak 3 years ago. Same one that took your parents, I'm guessing." "Yes," Ayanna said softly. "That was a terrible winter." "It was. I've been managing alone since, but it's getting harder. Cattle need constant attention, especially during calving and moving to different pastures. I need someone who can track strays, find grazing areas, help with daily herd management." As they rode deeper into hills, Ayanna saw signs of Thomas's ranch: improved trails, fence lines, eventually healthy, well-cared-for cattle. The house, when it appeared, was small but well-built stone construction beside a clear stream. A barn, outbuildings, and horse corrals completed the modest but carefully maintained operation. "There's a small room off the house back you can use," Thomas said as they dismounted. "Meant to be a pantry, but there's space for a bed and belongings. You'll take meals with me. I'm not much of a cook, but I manage." As Thomas showed her around, explaining routines and pointing out tools and supplies, Ayanna felt something she hadn't experienced in years: belonging somewhere, having purpose beyond mere survival. The sun was setting in brilliant orange and purple when they finished the tour. Standing beside the stream watching light fade from western mountains, Thomas spoke quietly. "I want you to know your uncle's words don't matter to me. I don't believe in curses, but even if I did, we all carry burdens. The question is whether we let them destroy us or find ways to carry them together." Ayanna looked at this man who had shown her more kindness in one day than her own people had in 3 years. For the first time since her parents' death, she allowed herself to hope her life might hold something more than endless isolation and struggle. "Thank you," she said simply, words carrying all her gratitude for this unexpected chance at redemption. The first weeks at the Brennan Ranch passed in a whirlwind of learning and determination. Ayanna threw herself into the work with desperate intensity, needing to prove her worth and justify Thomas's faith in her. She rose before dawn each day, helping with morning chores before riding out to check scattered cattle herds. Her Apache upbringing served her well. She could track strays across rocky terrain that would baffle most cowboys, find water sources in seemingly barren areas, and read subtle signs indicating when cattle were stressed or sick. Thomas watched her work with growing admiration, clearly impressed by skills her own people had dismissed. "You're worth 3 regular cowhands," he told her one evening after she'd spent hours tracking down cattle that had wandered into a box canyon. Her tracking abilities had saved them from what could have been a multi-day search. "I am glad to be useful," she replied, but Thomas heard the pleasure in her voice. For someone treated as worthless for years, his appreciation meant everything. As days turned to weeks, comfortable routine developed between them. Thomas proved a fair employer and surprisingly good companion. He respected her need for space while making clear she was welcome to join him for meals and evening conversation. Slowly, carefully, they began sharing pieces of their respective pasts. Ayanna learned Thomas had come west from Tennessee after the war between the states, seeking fresh starts where a man's past mattered less than his willingness to work hard. He'd met wife Sarah in Santa Fe, where she worked as a schoolteacher. They'd married after brief courtship and moved to Arizona Territory to start their ranch and family. Daniel was just 5 when fever took him, Thomas said one night, voice thick with emotion. Smart as a whip, that boy. Always asking questions, wanting to help with animals. Sarah used to say he'd be a better rancher than me someday. Ayana understood such grief's weight, having carried her own so long. Tell me about her. Your wife. Thomas smiled, warmth mixed with sadness. Sarah was determined. When she set her mind on something, nothing could stop her. She decided this ranch would succeed and worked alongside me every day to make it happen. She could brand a calf, doctor a sick horse, and still have dinner ready when work was done. The conversations helped them both. Thomas had been carrying grief alone for 3 years, just as she had. Having someone who understood loss, who didn't offer false comfort or meaningless platitudes, allowed him to speak his wife and son's names without feeling like he imposed his pain on others. In return, Ayana began sharing memories of her parents and life before superstition made her an outcast. She told Thomas about her father's hunting skills, her mother's talent with traditional crafts, and the belonging she'd known as a child within the Apache community. They sound like good people, Thomas said after she described helping her mother gather wild plants for medicine and dyes. They were. I try to honor their memory by living according to what they taught about strength and dignity, even when others cannot see those qualities in me. As autumn approached, ranch work intensified, preparing for winter. They spent long days moving cattle to lower pastures, where animals would be better protected from snow and wind. Ayana's riding skills improved rapidly under Thomas's patient instruction, and she soon became nearly as capable on horseback as on foot. During one cattle drive, they encountered their first real test. Raiders, probably deserters from territorial conflicts, had been stealing cattle from area ranches. Thomas and Ayana discovered evidence of their presence when they found remains of a butchered steer in a hidden canyon. They're probably watching us right now, Thomas said quietly, examining the site. These canyons provide perfect ambush cover. Ayana studied tracks around the butchering site, trained eyes reading the story in disturbed earth and broken vegetation. 3 men, maybe 4. They have been here recently, no more than 2 days ago. Can you track them? She nodded, already following the faint trail deeper into rocky terrain. Thomas followed, rifle ready, as they pursued raiders through increasingly treacherous country. The trail led to a narrow box canyon where raiders had set up temporary camp. From their concealed position on the rim above, Thomas and Ayana could see 3 men around a small fire, apparently confident in their security. Nearby, a small herd of stolen cattle grazed under a 4th man's guard. We could ride back to town for the sheriff, Thomas whispered, but by the time we returned, they'd be gone. Ayana studied the camp layout, noting escape routes and defensive positions. There is another way. If you create a distraction, I can work around behind them. These men do not know this country as I do. Thomas looked skeptical. That's dangerous. If something goes wrong, everything is dangerous, Ayana replied calmly. But these men are stealing from you, and they will continue stealing from others, if not stopped. Sometimes we must take risks to do what is right. After discussion, they developed a plan. Thomas would position himself to provide covering fire if needed, while Ayana used her tracking skills to approach from an unexpected direction. The goal was capturing or driving off raiders and recovering stolen cattle. The plan worked better than either dared hope. Ayana's ability to move silently through rocky terrain allowed her to get close enough to stampede the horses raiders counted on for escape. When animals scattered, the men found themselves trapped in the canyon with limited options. Faced with capture or difficult escape on foot through hostile territory, the raiders chose surrender. Thomas and Ayana marched them to the nearest town, turned them over to territorial authorities and reclaimed the stolen cattle. The successful crisis resolution marked a turning point in their relationship. Thomas had seen Ayana's courage and competence under pressure, while she had experienced the satisfaction of protecting something important to both of them. They were no longer just employer and employee. They had become partners in the truest sense. That evening, sitting on the porch watching recovered cattle graze peacefully in the home pasture, Thomas spoke words that had been building in his heart for weeks. I want you to know, this is your home now, for as long as you want it. Not just a job, not just a place to stay, home. Ayana felt tears prick her eyes at the simple generosity of the offer. After years believing she would always be an outsider, unwanted and unwelcome, here was someone offering exactly what she thought was lost forever. Thank you. she said, voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you can know. As stars emerged in the darkening sky above them, both Thomas and Ayana felt something new stirring in their hearts. The grief and loneliness that had defined their lives for so long were still present, but no longer the only emotions either felt. In finding someone who understood their pain, they had also discovered the possibility of healing, and perhaps in time, of love. Winter settled over the Arizona mountains with surprising gentleness, bringing crisp mornings and clear, cold nights that washed the air clean. The ranch work slowed to a manageable pace, giving Thomas and Ayana time for maintenance projects and to enjoy each other's company without constant, urgent tasks. During these quieter months, their relationship began deepening beyond partnership into something neither had expected to feel again. The change came gradually, in shared laughter, comfortable silences, and growing awareness that they had become essential to each other's happiness. Ayana found herself anticipating their evening conversations with feelings that went beyond mere loneliness. Thomas listened in ways that made her feel heard and understood, and his gentle humor helped lighten memories that had burdened her so long. When he laughed at something she said, she felt warmth that had nothing to do with the hearth fire. For his part, Thomas discovered that losing Sarah and Daniel, while still painful, no longer dominated every moment. Ayana's quiet strength and steady presence had given him something to live for beyond mere survival. Her insights about land and animals had made him a better rancher, but more importantly, her friendship had made him feel human again. The shift from friendship to something deeper happened on a particularly cold February evening. They had spent the day repairing storm-damaged fence lines, working side by side in companionable efficiency. As darkness fell, they returned to the house tired but satisfied. Ayana was preparing dinner when she noticed Thomas standing at the window, staring at snow-covered landscape with an expression she couldn't read. Something in his posture suggested sadness, and she set aside her cooking to join him. "What troubles you?" she asked gently. Thomas was quiet before answering. Today would have been Daniel's 8th birthday. Sarah always made such celebrations of birthdays. She said they were the most important days because they marked another year of having the people you love in your life. Ayana felt her heart clench with sympathy. Without thinking, she touched his arm, a gesture of comfort that felt natural as breathing. "Tell me what she would have done," she said. "How would Sarah have celebrated?" Thomas looked down at her hand on his arm, surprised but grateful for the contact. She would have made a cake, even substituting honey for sugar and using precious eggs. She would have insisted we all sing, even though none of us could carry a tune. And she would have given Daniel something special, usually small but meaningful, like a carved whistle or book of stories. Ayana nodded thoughtfully. "Then we should do those things, to honor his memory and hers." "We don't have supplies for proper cake," Thomas protested, but she could see the idea appealed to him. "Then we will make what we can with what we have," Ayana replied practically. "I know how to make sweet bread with honey and dried berries. It may not be cake, but it will be made with love and remembrance." They spent the next 2 hours working together in the kitchen, creating their improvised celebration of Daniel's memory. Ayana's sweet bread turned out better than expected, and Thomas found himself smiling as he told stories about his son's mischievous adventures. When they finally sat to share their simple feast, Thomas raised his coffee cup in toast. "To Daniel and to Sarah, who taught me that love doesn't end with death, it just finds new ways to grow." "To Daniel and Sarah," Ayana agreed, raising her cup. "And to the love that lives on in hearts of those who remember." As they clinked cups together, Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Looking at Ayana in lamplight, her dark eyes soft with shared emotion, her face gentle with understanding, he realized that somewhere along the way he had fallen in love with her. Not as replacement for Sarah, but as someone entirely her own, someone who had brought light back when he thought it would remain forever dark. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. How could he love again when losing his first family had nearly destroyed him? But looking at Ayana, he understood this love was different, built on shared strength rather than need, on mutual respect rather than dependence. Ayana saw the change in his expression and felt her own heart respond with recognition. She had been fighting growing feelings for weeks, telling herself it was gratitude rather than love, protection rather than attraction. But seeing him honor his lost family, while including her in that sacred remembrance, She could no longer deny what had been growing between them. "Thomas," she said softly, setting down her cup and reaching across the table to take his hand, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, though he thought he could guess from the way her fingers trembled slightly in his. "I was afraid to hope for this," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "For so long I believed I was destined to live alone, that the curse my uncle spoke of meant I could never have what others had. But you have shown me that love is not about perfection or luck. It is about choosing to stand together even when life is difficult." Thomas felt his breath catch as he understood what she was trying to say. "Ayanna, I love you," she said simply, dark eyes meeting his without shame or apology. "Not because you saved me from my old life, but because you have shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued. I love your strength and kindness, your dedication to this land, and the way you honor those you have lost." For a moment, Thomas couldn't speak past the emotion clogging his throat. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with feeling. "I love you too," he said, lifting her hand to press a gentle kiss to her palm. "You've brought life back to this ranch, and to my heart. You've shown me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding courage to love again despite the risk of loss." They came together across the small table, their first kiss tender and careful, full of reverence for the precious gift they were offering each other. When they finally separated, both were crying, not from sadness but from overwhelming relief of finding love when neither had believed it possible. The months that followed brought challenges, as any relationship must. There were moments when grief for their respective losses threatened to overwhelm their new happiness. Times when differences in their backgrounds created misunderstandings requiring patience and communication to resolve. The Apache community's reaction to news of their relationship was mixed. Some, including her uncle, declared it proof she had been irredeemably corrupted. Others, however, began questioning whether the curse had ever been real or simply convenient excuse for prejudice and fear. The white community in the nearest town was equally divided. Some ranchers respected Thomas's judgment and welcomed Ayanna as his wife, recognizing her valuable contributions. Others viewed their relationship with suspicion or outright hostility, unable to see past racial prejudices. But Thomas and Ayanna faced these challenges together, drawing strength from shared love and mutual respect. They married in a simple ceremony performed by a territorial judge with only a few close friends as witnesses. Ayanna wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas bought in town, and Thomas wore his best suit, freshly cleaned for the occasion. On their wedding night, standing on the porch of their home looking out over land they would build their future on together, Ayanna reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had listened to warnings about my curse?" she asked, leaning against Thomas's strong shoulder. "I think about how empty my life would have remained," Thomas replied, tightening his arms around her. "How I would have missed out on the greatest blessing I've ever received." "And what blessing is that?" Ayanna asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Learning that love doesn't make us weak or vulnerable," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It makes us stronger than we ever imagined. It gives us something worth fighting for, worth building toward, worth believing in." As they went inside to begin their new life together, both understood they had found something rare and precious, a love born from mutual respect and shared strength, a partnership built on understanding that life's greatest victories are not won alone, but together with someone who sees your true worth even when the rest of the world is blind to it. Their story became legend in the territory, the tale of the cursed Apache woman and grieving rancher who found redemption in each other's arms. But for Thomas and Ayanna, it was simply the beginning of a life built on love, respect, and unshakable belief that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as curses, and the strongest love grows from soil of shared struggle and mutual understanding.